the aisle Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island last night, a Democrat, both suggested that the government might need, that the administration might propose a second stimulus. I only chuckle because of your view and my view that you can't solve a problem caused by too much borrowing and spending with more borrowing and spending. But the money that the government is authorized to borrow under the so-called stimulus program, which is about $780 billion on February of '09, they've only borrowed and spent about 10% of that. Under what conceivable theory do they now think they can go back to Congress and get the authority to borrow more money when they haven't even spent 90% of what they have the authority to borrow?
Well, you know, there's a lot of reason to be pessimistic about what's happening down here, and I always try to look on the positive side and search out for a positive program or whatever movement and direction we're going in. But if they come along and they're able to do that, believe me, that will be just more discouragement to everybody who's trying to correct this mess, and the American people will just become more outraged because they're upset about the first one. How do they believe it, that the American people are going to say, yeah, that's a great idea, another $700 billion, pass it on out to your cronies and bail out your friends and your buddies, close the books, and don't even talk about the Federal Reserve. The American people are catching on. I just think that the time has passed when they can run roughshod over us and try to talk the American people into just blindly endorsing everything that we do here. So that, to me, is a good sign that the American people are fed up with this.
What's your take, switching gears a little bit, Congressman Paul, what's your take on the president's trip to Russia and the president's trip to Italy, up to the G8, to the G20, first with Russia? Do you think that he's involved in some kind of negotiations or deals that we should know about? Do you think that he, notwithstanding his protest to the contrary when he was a senator, will pick up the same cudgel, the same mantle of sort of a muscular, bullying foreign policy that his predecessor employed? What's your best guess?
Well, I think he's burning up too many fossil fuels, what I think he's doing. I think he ought to stay home, park Air Force One for a while. But yeah, all kinds of things could be happening. I don't know what he's promising. You know, he went over earlier in the spring and promised at one of the group meetings and said, oh yeah, we'll give you $105 billion to the IMF. So he comes back and he says, hey, Congress, I promised him $105 billion. You better do it. So the party comes up and says, he made the promise. His honor is on the line. So we give him $105 billion. So all these negotiations are what he's doing. Who knows what he's talking about? But so far, he hasn't indicated that he'd take those anti-ballistic missiles from the borders of Russia. If he really wants to improve relations with Russia, why don't we just bring those missiles home? What would we say if the Russians were doing that in Mexico? We'd be furious. So I don't know what he's talking about. I don't think he's up to much good. But I know that one thing, that if you wanted to change policy, you could probably do it over the telephone.
Let you go. On Sunday afternoon at 6 p.m., it was a Sunday, it was a 3-day holiday weekend, a federal judge walked into his courtroom in Lower Manhattan and read into the record an 85-page opinion authorizing and approving the proposed bankruptcy, sale, and creation of a new General Motors. This was done after very, very minimal and virtually meaningless testimony. It took fewer than 5 weeks. It was arguably the biggest bankruptcy in American history. And it put the American taxpayer on the tab for $50 billion. This a company that loses money on every car it makes. And not a peep of protest, except from folks like you and I and the people watching us now who monitor this all the time. Not a peep of protest was to be heard. Is government nationalization of failing businesses now about to become so commonplace that we are not shocked when things like this happen?
Yeah, I refer to this process as nationalization without a whimper. It just goes on and on. But fortunately, we have you and others out there talking. But I have to add, Judge, that I have to run. The bells are ringing, and I have about a minute to get to the floor.
To get there in time to vote, Congressman Paul, thanks for joining us until next week on Freedom Watch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Schiff joins us now. I've been using your name all day, my good friend. because the House of Representatives issued a report, I'm sure you've seen this, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, which basically vindicates what you said before the financial crisis was made known to us. You knew about it before anybody did. It basically says, without mentioning you by name, that you were right. It was the forces of government that pushed bankers into areas that they didn't want to go, that caused the housing bubble, that caused the recession that we're all suffering now.
Of course. I mean, I was writing extensively about this stuff in 2004 and 2005. And, I saw an interview on one of the financial channels, and I don't remember if he was the head of Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. It was one of those two.
Right.
And he was announcing that for the first time, going forward, they were going to begin, when they guaranteed mortgages, these are mortgages the U.S. government was guaranteeing, they were going to make sure that the borrowers who are using ARMs can actually qualify for the reset and not just the teaser rate.
All right. When you say ARMs, this is an adjustable rate mortgage where the teaser rate is very low and very tempting and probably less than what the free market value of renting that money would be.
Right. And when you had, usually with an ARM, you had an introductory rate where the payments were very low for 2 or 3 years, and then the rate would adjust much higher. And what Freddie and Fannie were doing when they qualified mortgages, they were only looking at the ability to pay the initial period. They were guaranteeing mortgages even though they knew going in that once the loans reset that the borrowers couldn't afford them. Let me just finish this. And the interviewer asked him, well, why are you just doing that now? Why didn't you do that all along? I mean, why would you guarantee a mortgage where you know the guy can't afford it? And this is what the guy said. I'm not making any of it up. He said, well, people were making a lot of money buying houses. People wanted to buy houses as an investment, as a speculation, and we didn't want to stop them. Who were we to interpose our judgment? People thought they would be able to afford it based on appreciation, and we didn't want to stop them.
I'm going to get back to that point in a minute because we're joined now by Senator Jim DeMint from the great state of South Carolina. Senator, I know you have a busy afternoon, and I appreciate you joining us. Welcome to Freedom Watch, Senator DeMint.
Well, thank you so much, Judge. It's great to be with you, and I'm glad to be talking about the subject of the Federal Reserve.
What has happened to your efforts to introduce a bill identical or similar to the one that has 250 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives, which would authorize and direct the GAO to audit the Fed?
Well, they used a procedural maneuver to keep me from offering on a bill we had last week, and I'll keep offering it, and I know if I can get it up for a vote that everyone will be too ashamed to vote against it. I mean, I think we can pass it. Nancy Pelosi is going to probably stop them from bringing it up in the House, even though they could pass it overwhelmingly. But we need to keep bringing this issue up. The Federal Reserve is very poorly understood in America. Its purpose as an independent agency was to protect the value of our dollar. But now they've gotten involved with so many different things, even monetizing our debt, in effect printing money to cover our debt, and printing money to try to stimulate the economy instead of maintaining the value of our dollar relative to the size of our economy. We want to audit the Federal Reserve. Right now the law prohibits the General Accounting Office from doing a complete audit, so we don't even know what they're involved with, and we know they're doing things internationally that that we're worried about.
What do you think that the Fed is worried about? What are they worried that we will find out if and when we get to audit them?
Well, they're trying to protect a precedent that keeps some supposed independence between them and the federal government. In this audit, they are considering an invasion of that. But the independence between them and the Treasury and our administration has totally disappeared. Any pretense of independence is gone. I mean, they're definitely working as an adjunct to the federal government, which they were never intended to do. They're being politically moved in different directions rather than acting independently to protect our currency. And they're doing things that are going to collapse the commercial real estate market. I mean, they're tightening up credit with our banks. We forget that it's the Federal Reserve regulators that control the lending of our banks. And even though the taxpayers have footed the bill for literally hundreds of billions of dollars to send to banks, the Federal Reserve has got its regulators tightening credit so that they can't make loans that they would otherwise make.
One of the things that I can't wait to see the public reaction to, when we already know the Fed does this. Ben Bernanke admitted it in the 60 Minutes interview, which is fiat money. I mean, the local Federal Reserve